Tony Pellegrino from GenRight Off-Road, and this video is to talk about the difference between a semi-float and a full float rear axle. So a semi-float axle is a traditional axle shaft with a flange on the end. This axle shaft typically has one bearing on the end that supports the shaft. It's mounted right here, and you've got a 6.5-inch flange where your lug nuts go, and that supports your wheel. So when you look at the bearings, this was a standard set 10 that came in a stock TJ or JK. Set 20, a little bit bigger, was what was used on an aftermarket TJ axle, and set 80 is what's used on an aftermarket JK axle. So this is a military grade bearing, much higher quality, and it does a pretty good job for up to a 37-inch tire. So when you think about the leverage that's got when you're off-roading, you know, pushing up against the side of V notches or trees or rocks, you know, that bearing's got to be pretty strong. So your option to upgrade and what you're using as you go to a bigger tire, or if you just want to go with the best that's available, is going to be a full float hub. Curry's designed a nice full float hub where you can run 5, 6, or 8 lug pattern. It's got the parking brake and the tone ring inside. So for those of you with JKs that need that toe ring for ABS brakes, that's super important. The benefit is, instead of one bearing, you've got multiple bearings inside like we do here on the race car axle. This doesn't have any parking brake or anything associated with that, but it was a good way to show you the snout and where the bearings mount. The hub is completely independent of the axle shaft. So instead, you get an axle shaft like this with no flange. So one end goes into the carrier, the other end goes into a drive flange, which is mounted inside the end of the axle. So now the hub is bearing all the weight of the vehicle and the drive force. So if you have a problem with the axle, it's not an issue. The wheel can still roll and stay fine. You can even remove the shaft and leave the wheel on. So this is a really good option. It's a nice upgrade. A lot of these vehicles are getting heavier as they're getting built. A JK, typical JK's into the 6,000 pound range. So having the multiple bearings is a much better way to support the weight. And it's going to give you the confidence to get out there and bounce up the trail of your choice and not have to worry about having a problem out there. So if you'd like a little bit more information, you can go over to the GenRight website or over to the Curry website. You can give us a call. We're happy to talk about what your options are, but just know that going bigger is better. So when you talk about axle size, the number of splines makes a difference. The spline is the same size on all these different axles. So in order to get more splines, you've got to increase the diameter. So if you look here, this is the typical size of a TJ or JK axle shaft. These are about 28 to 30 splines, and they're just a little bit over 1 inch in diameter. You move up the scale here to a 35 spline. This is kind of the standard, and this is 1.5 inches in diameter, and then this far end is 40 spline or 1.75 inches. The size really makes a difference, plus the number of splines is also the amount of engagement that it has in the carrier and in the hub. So that's important too, because a lot of the time if you have problems with an axle, it's in the spline area. So to have more splines engaged, you're more likely to have success and long-term durability in what you've got. So you definitely want to move up on splines. When you go to the full float hub, it's a real easy option to upgrade inside here because the drive flange is all that changes. The hub stays the same. So when you're buying that carrier, to change from 35 to 40 spline is a super easy thing to do on the inside of the axle, and then you're set and you've got a super heavy duty axle that you can run for years.